Good afternoon, and welcome to Austin, Texas. I'm Veranda Durden, President and CEO of Any Baby Can. We're pleased to partner with TexProtects and the sponsor of today's presentation, Texas Child Welfare Funders Philanthropy Southwest. Any Baby Can partners with families to overcome obstacles and achieve well-being. At the state and national level, we are keeping a close eye on issues around early intervention, maternal health, home visiting, and mental health, which directly impact our ability to work towards our organization's goal. Today, we will take a closer look at ways we can positively impact the health and safety of children in the upcoming 88th Texas legislative session. We are grateful for the opportunity to collaborate with each of you and TexProtects to ensure that children have the best possible start in life. We encourage each of you to share your unique perspectives on improving the current system during our breakout sections, as our collective input will ensure we meet our goals. A little about Any Baby Can. For more than 42 years, Any Baby Can has served families and children in Central Texas. Our journey began on East 7th Street in Austin as the Den Family Resource Center with a small group of folks who envisioned a brighter future for the children in their community. Along the way, we've added staff, programs, changed our name and location. What has not changed is our focus on strengthening families so their children can succeed. One of our strengths is our ability to meet our clients where they are, physically, at home, work or school, and emotionally wherever they are in their journey of caring for their child. We help them address their challenges, including navigating medical, educational, and financial obstacles. As our community continues to grow and expand, we have also grown to serve more families and more counties in Central Texas. Our services are needed. As noted on this slide, half of the families we serve are experiencing poverty. We provide comprehensive programs and services that range from medical case management, therapy services, parenting education, to mental and emotional support and basic needs assistance. The last few years have been challenging for many of us, and the families we serve at Any Baby Can have been hit the hardest. Parents are facing more stress from financial instability. Children are experiencing more developmental delays. We have stepped up to support families and their children when they needed us the most. We know that early intervention matters and is better for the child. And we see a return on our investment from prevention services, not just for the child's growth and development, but for our society. So thank you for joining us today. Back to you, Carrie.
Thanks so much, Veranda. And welcome everyone for coming. And thank you all for taking time out of your day. And thank you so much to Any Baby Can for being such a great partner. We're excited to be back and partnering with you guys again for this event. My name is Carrie Giudice, for those who don't know me, and I'm the Child Protection Policy Manager at TexProtects. We want to thank you all for joining us today for what we consider to be part 2 of the Texas tour. We really enjoyed getting to hear from you all last year around this time about what was going on in your community, what you all felt were the most pressing issues for us to consider over this past interim as we get ready to head into a legislative session, and really just figuring out how we can more adequately support children and families. And honestly, we're really looking forward to this conversation today. Our plan here is not just to speak at you. We, again, want this to be interactive. Our plan, we will be hearing from Any Baby Can what they want to see prioritized this legislative session. And then you're going to hear from our policy team at TexProtects. We're going to lay out what we know about the child protection and well-being landscape. and then lay out our priorities. And so then after that, we will shift into a time of discussion where we want to hear from you all again. We want to learn what folks in your area are doing and focusing on that aligns with our priorities. We really want to provide that space for you to all give us updates on any information we need to know and figure out how we can join forces to get these priorities across the finish line this upcoming session. Let's see. All right. But before we jump in, I just, again, want to thank our sponsor, the Texas Child Welfare Funders. We're so thankful for their support of this series of events and really honestly just for valuing these conversations so much. I'm going to introduce to you guys Christine Gendron. She's here with us today. And I've had the honor and privilege of knowing her for quite some time and working with her in several different roles. She is the board president for the Texas Child Welfare Funders and the vice president of KPG Family Foundation, which is a small family foundation that offers grants to organizations that serve children and families. Christine has worked in the child welfare field for 15 years now, partially as a consultant. She's also been the executive director of a statewide provider association, as a vice president for a multi-state child welfare agency, and as a foster parent. So she doesn't just talk the talk, she walks the walk. So Christine, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you, Carrie. I appreciate that introduction. So like Carrie said, we've worked together for many years and I've worn many different hats in child welfare, but today I'm here as the president of Texas Child Welfare Funders. We are a peer group of Philanthropy Southwest dedicated to strengthening the child welfare system in Texas. We are a group for foundations that are interested in strengthening the child welfare system. So if we have any funders on our call who are interested in child welfare, we'd love for you to get plugged in. The slide that you see on the screen has a link to our website as well as a QR code that will take you to our website. Participation in our group is totally free. We are really just focused on engaging as many funders in child welfare as we can. I want to thank TexProtects and Carrie and others for engaging us as partners in this tour. So we are a small, pretty grassroots group. The main way that we are able to offer programming is by partnering with organizations such as TexProtects that are leaders in this work. It's important for us to make sure that funders have the information they need to understand what the biggest issues and challenges are in the child welfare system, as well as the potential solutions to make the system stronger. And so we're grateful for the work that TexProtects and others do. And I will stop here and pass it off to the next speaker so that they can get to it. Thank you.
At Any Baby Can, we provide an early childhood intervention program, ECI. ECI is a federal state program that contracts with community organizations like Any Baby Can to provide life-changing therapies and services to babies and toddlers with significant developmental delays. ECI is an entitlement program. That means if a child meets the eligibility requirement, we must provide services, which is good. We cannot stop serving these kids at such a crucial point in their lives. However, there is currently no requirement in Texas that says that ECI programs will be reimbursed for all services provided. Sadly, there's a gap in funding for the program and it's growing. Let's welcome Guillermo Lopez, Any Baby Can's ECI Senior Director, to speak more on Any Baby Can's advocacy for increased ECI funding.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us. Little background on me: I'm a licensed occupational therapist practicing pediatric occupational therapy for more than 30 years. I've been part of the Any Baby Can ECI program since 2001. Raising a child with developmental or physical challenges can be confusing, difficult, and at times isolating. As Rhonda mentioned, we provide therapy for children with autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, and other disabilities that impact developmental milestones. We provide services to families in Travis, Hayes, Blanco, and Llano counties. Before I talk a little bit more, I want to share a story of our client, Gerardo, and his mom, Mayra.
We knew from the time that I was 5 months pregnant with Gerardo that things weren't going to be easy. I went to my OB checkup. That's where we found out that Gerardo had hydrocephalus. The doctors doubted that he would be born at all. But as a family, we had faith. If it's meant for Gerardo to be here, it's meant for him to be here. I had to have a major C-section with him. So they took him out and they told us we're gonna try to stabilize him. They had to transfer him to the Dose Children's Hospital. And then that's when the doctor told us about his other medical issues he had. And he told us, take him home, give him all your love. Because it could be days, weeks, months, not even a year that you might have Gerardo in your life. That's when we went home and hospice would go every day. And it was hard. It was hard on me because I ended up quitting my job. During the day, I was the only one with him. So the day came, Any Baby Can came right into our house and gave Gerardo occupational speech and physical therapy. He had no strength. He couldn't really do much. But Loretta worked with him day by day. She wouldn't, let him quit. She wouldn't let me quit neither. And even by the time he turned 3, he went to school. He was just walking on his own. I'm happy. I'm happy. He overcame everything that the doctors didn't think he would be doing. Yeah, Gerardo's something else. I would definitely recommend Any Baby Can to anyone. They were teaching me as they were working with Gerardo. That gave me the strength, I am not alone. I am forever going to be grateful with Any Baby Can. They'll always be part of my heart.
I love that video. I've seen it a couple of times, and it always touches me. Over the past 2 years, Any Baby Can, like other ECI providers, has experienced high caseload growth, causing a strain on providers across the state of Texas, especially here in Austin. Any Baby Can's ECI contract for last fiscal year was to have an average monthly enrollment of 625. We actually averaged 691 families a month. That is 66 additional families that receive much needed services such as speech, occupational, and physical therapy, along with service coordination month over month. We are almost 3 months into FY23, and we are currently serving more kids than our monthly enrollment number with less money, even as our business costs continue to increase. A couple of months ago in September, we testified in support of the Texas Health and Human Services legislative appropriation request for fiscal year 2024 and 2025, accessional item 11, for additional funds necessary to address caseload growth for ECI services. We also spoke about the need to change in the ECI methodology to use the number of children served instead of the average monthly enrollment. This change would result in a more accurate cost per child and allow for funding that represents the true cost of providing ECI services. We know that return investment in children in our community is tremendous. Through continued advocacy for ECI, together we can address the strain on providers across Texas and ensure families receive the support they need. The takeaways really are: more children need ECI services, more funding is required to meet the demand for services. The ECI allocation methodology needs to be updated to reflect children served versus average monthly enrollment. Prevention is proven to work. Long-term savings in healthcare costs and community well-being is the return on the investment in ECI. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Guillermo and Veranda, for sharing more about the amazing work that you all do at Any Baby Can. We've been very lucky to work with you all closely as part of the Prenatal to 3 collaborative that TexProtects helps to lead. And I'm just always amazed at just how much y'all have going on and all of the really great work that you do. So thank you so much for sharing that and for continuing to partner with us in this work. We really appreciate it. We are so glad that you all are here with us today and took time out of your busy schedule to hear from us. My name is Brittany Taylor Ross, and I am the Prenatal to 3 Policy Manager here at TexProtects, and I am joined by the rest of our policy team. So Carrie Judice, who is our Child Protection Policy Manager, who you heard from at the top of our show here, and Emily Williams, who is our Mental Health Policy Fellow, who you will hear from in just a little bit. So as Carrie mentioned, we had the honor and privilege of going to about 8 different communities and hearing from folks just like you over the past year. And one of the themes that has really echoed loud and clear was just this overall lack of support for children and families, that we can't just keep doing more of the same and kind of sticking to that status quo, and that we should be investing more in keeping families together. So we took this information, we talked with lawmakers, observed interim hearings at the Capitol, to figure out what was feasible and also what was going to have the most impact as we move into this next legislative session. So all of that together kind of helped us to land on our official legislative agenda that we are really excited to walk through with you all today. So just really quickly, for those of you who aren't familiar with who we are, TexProtects is the only nonprofit and nonpartisan advocacy organization in Texas that is singularly focused on the prevention of child abuse and neglect. And we are also proud to be the Texas chapter of Prevent Child Abuse America. Through education, research, and advocacy, we work to promote smart strategies all along the prevention spectrum to hopefully prevent child abuse and neglect from ever happening at all, but also looking at strategies that will keep families together and prevent removals, and just really work towards what is in the best interest and safety of our kids here in Texas. So as I mentioned, we took what you all had to say. You had a lot of great feedback, and we looked at the data and the research just to really see what was it telling us. And I think you will see here today that all of this information really points us as to why it is so necessary to better support children and families in Texas. So let's go ahead and jump in and take a look. So as a state, we wanted to look at how are we doing compared to the national average when it comes to caring for our children. We all know that Texas likes to be the best at everything. We like to be #1. But we aren't quite there yet when it comes to supporting children and families in our state. So as you can see here, according to the State of Babies report from 2022, there are some things that we are doing really well in Texas, and some things that we're just not quite meeting the mark when it comes to serving families in their communities. You can see here that Texas has more children who are uninsured. We have less families receiving benefits and supportive services overall, and just less resilience when it comes to family circumstances. So what does this show us? What is this telling us? Again, and you'll hear us repeat this over and over again today as a theme, but this shows us that families are in need of support and resources, and we really need to be rising to the occasion and meeting them where they are as a state. So here is another way that we know that families are in need of support in our state. We know that there are really great resource and referral networks already in place in Texas, such as the 211 Resource and Referral Network, and localized resource and navigation services such as Help Me Grow. But we still, in spite of that, we still have families calling the CPS Abuse and Neglect Hotline just because they need to be connected to services and they don't know who else to call. So we can see how steady this trend has been. Over the last decade, 4 out of 10 calls to the CPS hotline are just because a family or an individual needed a referral to somewhere else in their community for some type of resource or supportive services. We know that the Department of Family and Protective Services has recently launched what they're calling their Parent Helpline, which I think will be really helpful in targeting some of these calls. So we're really curious to see what this helpline does, the launch of this helpline does with this trend. And we, of course, hope that it would help to connect families to the resources they need at the right time. And now I'm going to pass it off to Carrie to talk a little bit more about these issues.
So we also know that more investigations are being closed out. If you've been on any calls with us or in different work groups, this is a trend that we've been hearing a lot about. We know that a lot of these, investigations are being closed out statewide without being referred to family-based safety services, or FBSS as you likely know them, which is that stage of service that's meant to provide families with supports and prevent removals. And so that top line is the statewide trend, and you would see almost, the Austin trend is pretty much on par with that. And so just because a family isn't referred to FBSS, we know that doesn't necessarily mean a family wouldn't benefit from services. But if ongoing support isn't being provided through CPS, this means we really need to rely on communities to reach these families outside of CPS intervention. We also know removals are down statewide. Overall, we've seen removals drop anywhere from about 40 to 50% over the last year and a half. Some areas have been impacted more than others, but the overall trend is in fact a decrease in kids coming into care. For Austin, again, you're looking at the statewide line on top, the Austin line on bottom. Again, you can see where this trend is happening here as well. So similar to what you heard me say about FBSS referrals being down, I would say that just because there's not that level of evidence that's needed to do a removal or things like that to meet that burden of proof, it doesn't mean that families wouldn't benefit from supports. So there's a lot of speculation. I do want to just pause here and talk about what we're hearing, because I know that there's a big question mark as to why we're seeing the numbers we are. The truth is, it's hard to kind of pinpoint just one thing, as a lot has happened over the last year and a half. So there's been a number of internal policy changes at the department. For instance, CPS implemented what's called concurrent stages between FBSS and investigations, where basically they can jointly work a case as soon as they know that the family would benefit from services to promote family preservation. And what we're hearing is that this is resulting actually in cases being closed out, sooner than maybe they should be. And so we also know that another internal policy change requires additional approvals for kids ages 12 and up. We know that last session, so that was the internal kind of changes. We know from last session, if you guys participated with us last time, you heard us talk about the change in neglect definition and the fact that they would be repealing those non-emergency removals. And so ultimately, the intent behind all of these changes, whether internal at the agency or put in place by the legislature, it's for less kids to come into care. But for less kids to come into care, we would have hoped that meant families were met with the services that they needed in the community to be successful. But the verdict is still kind of out if this has been more hurtful or harmful to families and their kids, and if they are in fact getting supports they may need. All we know is they aren't receiving those supports through CPS via FBSS or a removal. And then I'm actually going to go ahead and pass this over to Emily to kind of talk about what we're seeing in the system.
Thanks, Carrie. So for kids who do come into the state's custody, we have seen another issue rise to the surface as a product of a capacity issue. Children without placement, or what you have heard referred to as CWAP. So when the state cannot find a placement for a child who either just came into CPS care or disrupted out of their most recent placement for any number of different reasons, they are taken to an unregulated setting that is not fully able to meet their needs. And then they're supervised by CPS staff or individuals who have been hired to provide around-the-clock supervision. So these are typically kids with higher complex needs. This pie chart on the right side of your screen gives you an idea of what kind of setting they were in before the state was unable to find them in an appropriate placement to meet their needs. They may have just spent time in a psychiatric hospital where they were deemed a danger to themselves or others. Maybe they had just returned from being on runaway status. But alarmingly, a good portion of these are youth whose parents have relinquished them to the state because they couldn't get them the mental health treatment that they needed in the community. So again, another scenario where supports aren't available in the community to keep families together. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the federal lawsuit. So on top of all of this, Texas is still in the middle of a federal lawsuit that has been going on for over a decade that continues to show that the state's child protection system continues to place kids at an unreasonable risk of harm. The lawsuit has revealed things like overburdensome caseloads, leading to the agency agreeing to a goal of 14 through 17 kids per caseworker. It also revealed that kids are being placed in settings with long histories of concerning deficiencies, leading to the need for heightened monitoring of these placements and more enforcement in the regulatory process. It has also continued to shed a light on the fact that our state is in need of expanding our array of mental health services. These are just to name a few. And while the state has made progress in remedying some of these issues, we aren't where we need to be just yet. So therefore, Texas will continue to be under the scrutiny of this lawsuit until we can make sure that kids who come into custody aren't experiencing further trauma in its care. And I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, so with all of these, issues that are going on in the system, there's just been a lot of pressure to do something different when it comes to foster care. And one way that's being pursued is to move away from that one-size-fits-all state approach to one that is led by each community. The idea is that communities know their communities best and can adapt easier if needed. This restructuring, you guys, if y'all been on any of our previous presentations, you guys know that's community-based care, or CBC, and it more formally began back in 2017, and it seems to be treated as kind of that silver bullet for a fix to the current foster care system. So CBC actually splits the state into 16 regions or catchment areas, and the idea is to contract with local providers in those different areas of the state to carry out foster care services. And so what you're seeing on your screen, the blue areas are actually where community-based care is already active. And then the green is where basically there have been appropriations made and the legislature saying, given the green light to move into those areas. And we do have a little bit of some insight into what the department is actually going to be advocating for this next legislative session. When it comes to community-based care, they want to see CBC going into 4 new areas. But we all know that if we're up to the legislature, based on how conversations have been going at the Capitol, CBC would be implemented across the state much faster and possibly even in smaller chunks. So based on all the information, again, you guys were so gracious to give us so much information. You see the data that we just kind of walked through. What we again know is that the system continues to show is that it's in perpetual crisis. And so we can confidently say that we know we need to be providing better supports for children and families all around. And that is what our legislative priorities aim to do in different ways. So we're going to spend a little time jumping into those and getting a little bit more into detail. So I'm going to pass it over to Brittany to talk to us about prevention.
Thanks, Carrie. So I am going to lead us off with our first prevention focused legislative priority for the 88th session. We will, of course, be happily supporting increased funding requests for the Prevention and Early Intervention Division of the Department of Family and Protective Services. They do amazing work to support families in their communities across the state. And similar to what Guillermo mentioned earlier with the HHSC Legislative Appropriations Request, or LAR, as we all know that our state agencies love our acronym, DFPS released their legislative appropriations request a few months ago. And again, this is just a document asking the legislature for increased funding above the base budget for priority items and programs. So we saw within that LAR that there appears to be, increased attention on the importance of prevention services, such as home visitation and resource and navigation services to support families and young children. We were really excited to see that there is an exceptional item within the legislative appropriations request to expand prevention and community well-being services by requesting $85.56 million over the base budget to expand home visitation programming by 50%, as well as a $2.3 million ask to support marketing around the prevention campaign for that Texas Parent Helpline that I mentioned earlier. This is a substantial and really historic ask and increase in the prevention budget for the department. And again, just speaks to that larger shift that we think is happening across the state around supporting these prevention, more upstream type services. So we will, of course, be linking arms with PEI and actively advocating and supporting them in these requests for the 88th legislative session. As you can see here on this next slide, prevention and early intervention services currently make up just 5% of the DFPS budget in comparison to spending on child protective services. We, of course, would like to see this chart pretty much flipped. And we know that we must prioritize meeting families and offering supports to them before a crisis occurs. To do this, of course, we are going to have to increase investment in supportive type services to help families get access to the services and supports they need at the right time. Our next prevention legislative priority is to scale up and expand universal prenatal and postpartum home visitation programs statewide. Evidence has shown us that these short-term postpartum home visitation services improve maternal and child health and well-being, while also connecting families to the resources they need at a very vulnerable time right after delivery. When we say universal, that means the program is offered to all families, regardless of income or any other eligibility criteria. And also important that these programs are voluntary. As you can see here on this next slide, about 1 in every 10 children in the US live in Texas. And this number is expected to continue to grow. I know probably all of us in our communities, especially if you're here in the Austin area, have seen just the exponential growth in population right here in our area over the past couple of years. So we know that families are going to continue to move to the state. So in light of that and the recent jobs decision at the national level, we are going to have more babies in Texas and more families that we need to assist by really helping to create that safety net for families with young kiddos in Texas. So again, we know there are a lot of young children and families in Texas who has access then to these kind of supportive type services that we're talking about. As you can see here on this slide, there are about 1.8 million families in Texas with children under the age of 6, and about 400,000, a little over 400,000 of these families may benefit from home visiting type services. That could be based on, identification of some type of risk factor, but less than 5% of families who could benefit from home visiting services are actually receiving them. And then as you can see on the next slide here in Central Texas, about 4,400 families were served with the prevention and early intervention funded services that we talked about earlier. So through PEI in 2021. So what do we know about these prevention services that are offered through the Prevention and Early Intervention Division of DFPS? We're going to take a look here quickly at a few outcomes from 2 different home visitation programs that are funded through PEI. So Family Connect, which is a universal postpartum nurse home visitation program in which a nurse comes to the home about 2 weeks after a family has given birth to a new baby, and they will come and do a quick screening with mom. It can be a depression screening, health screening. They will also do a quick well-being check with mom and baby, and really just help the family to get connected to anything that they might need. So it's not just for mom, not just for baby, it's really for the whole family to ensure that they are getting access to whatever they might need, again, at this very vulnerable time. And that can look like a home, maybe 1 home visit or up to 3 home visits over the first few weeks after a family is home after delivery. And then also, we're going to take a quick look here at parents as teachers, which I'm not going to explain because they have been around for a very long time and do really great work, and I'm sure you are all familiar with them. But as you can see here with the Family Connects program specifically, families saw a 30% reduction in maternal postpartum depression or anxiety symptoms, 50% less infant emergency medical care at 12 months, and 44% fewer CPS investigations at 2 years of age, and 39% fewer CPS investigations at 5 years. And then on the other side of the screen there, you can see with parents and teachers, 22% decreased likelihood of child maltreatment substantiations and 50% fewer cases of suspected abuse or neglect. So all this to say, we know that home visitation programs offer successful outcomes for families and work to protect children by connecting families again to the resources and supports that they need. So our strategy this legislative session is to scale and expand universal perinatal home visitation programs statewide through legislation and a possible budget rider. We had a similar bill, if you'll remember, and budget rider last session that was championed by Representative Donna Howard. This bill seemed to have a lot of bipartisan support, but just didn't quite make it to the finish line. And we've had a great opportunity to continue to work with Representative Howard's office during this interim on these issues, and they have been a huge help and support to us as we continue to advocate for this. So the bill this session would create a competitive grant program within the Department of Family and Protective Services PEI division that will be able to accept funds from multiple sources and distribute them to community providers for the expansion of voluntary home visits for caregivers and infants. And an accompanying budget rider would be utilized for funding purposes to try to secure more funding for these great programs. And now I'm going to turn it over to Emily to talk about our next prevention-focused priority.
Thank you, Brittany. So we've spoke a lot about prevention with home visitation and other services. And now I'd like to speak on prevention just a bit more in regards to our ACEs priority. So as most of you know, our aim with this bill is to make strides in improving the delivery of prevention services and increase the availability of these services so that all families and children from all backgrounds can access them in order to prevent ACEs from happening in the first place. And here on this next slide, we have a glimpse at the prevalence of ACEs in Texas. This is from the National Survey of Children's Health. I will say, however, that this survey is based on a parent self-report, and it doesn't include questions about child abuse and neglect. So even these numbers likely underestimate the actual incidence of ACEs. There's a lot here, so feel free to read the slide while I touch on just a couple. The highest percentage comes from children that have experienced the divorce or separation of a parent, as approximately 1.8 million children have been impacted by divorce or separation, which actually makes up about 1/4 of children in Texas. The second highest was the 12.4% that reported that they had difficulty paying for food and housing from the household income, and this was reported at somewhat often. So while this data is crucial to understand the prevalence, I want to remind everyone that these numbers make up hundreds of thousands of children's real life experiences. So we know that adverse childhood experiences can also be very traumatic experiences. And we also know that trauma can increase the likelihood of negative outcomes across the lifespan development. So trauma poses great risk to mothers and babies as it can increase health risk during pregnancy and cause preterm births and low birth weight. It can also cause significant deficits in brain development, such as cognitive impairment. It has been proven to increase the likelihood of one experiencing a chronic disease, such as diabetes, cancer, and others. And in the school and work settings, we often see children being expelled from school, having a higher academic failure rate, and adults losing time at work to seek treatment. And lastly, we know that there's an increased rate of participating in risky behavior, such as substance use, violence against others, and unsafe or risky sexual practices. So now let's look at some of the economic impacts of ACEs that ACEs can have. So TexProtects estimates that in 2019, Texas spent approximately $52.9 billion on the lifetime cost of confirmed child maltreatment cases. Some of the most staggering numbers come from the national health spending cost, with 168 billion for illicit drug use and 160 billion annually for smoking. So research shows that reducing trauma within families can lead to better financial outcomes later. Those who experience 4 or more ACEs across the lifespan are 1.6 times more likely to live in poverty as an adult than those who have not experienced ACEs. And in 2019, about 1.5 million children were living in poverty. That ranks Texas at 40 out of 50 states when it comes to the overall poverty rate. So of all of the issues I mentioned here today, all of these are reasons why we push the ACEs bill. This bill will help us connect with stakeholders and communities across Texas to better identify what is working and what is not, to really tackle the cause of childhood adversity. It will give state agencies back community guidance to better identify strategies to increase effectiveness of state prevention dollars. We can then use these findings to propose recommendations to the next legislator so that we can continue to do what works, stop what doesn't work, and make children and families strong. So that wraps up our ACEs priority, and I'll now pass it back to Carrie.
Thanks, Emily. All right, y'all are going to hear from me for a little bit. I'm going to wrap us up with our last 3 priorities. But the first one we're going to talk about is kinship. Our ultimate goal here is that we want more children to be placed with relatives by making sure that these caregivers have the supports that they need. And we actually have 2 strategies that we'll be pushing. The first one you're seeing on your screen here is, again, developing and funding a pilot program that will increase financial and legal supports for relatives to prevent removals. And then we've got one for when kids come into care. But real quick, I want to kind of do a little bit of defining so we kind of are on the same page about what we're talking about here. Because kinship is a very big umbrella and we use a lot of words interchangeably. So first, again, important that we talk about definitions. So what do we mean when we say kinship or kin? We're talking about relatives or friends of the family who step in and care for a child when it's unsafe for them to remain in the home of their parents. We know that relatives step in and care for kids in all kinds of scenarios. When kin steps in and provides care for a child in their home when CPS doesn't have custody, that is called an informal kinship placement. And then there are kin that step in and care for a child when the state does have custody. And those are referred to formal kinship placements. So, all right, we're on the same page here. We're going to kind of move through this here. So you heard me mention 2 strategies, one that is focused on informal kinship and one that's focused on formal. And we'll kind of start with the informal kinship placement here. So what we've heard is there are 2 main barriers, again, for those informal kinship placements, and that's financial and legal. When the state doesn't have custody, a lot of people don't know that there's actually no financial assistance that comes from the department, nor any legal standing for an informal kinship caregiver to make decisions on the child's behalf. So to address this, we want to see a pilot program developed that would ensure the relatives are provided and connected to both legal and financial supports in order to prevent a removal. We want to make sure that there's some sort of case manager or somebody that can kind of help navigate with those services, that understands the unique needs of relatives, and that way they can get them the resources that they need. And ideally, a court would be involved so they can help make sure that some sort of legal standing is in place if the case is dismissed with the child remaining in the home of that relative. And then we've got, again, talking about kids that, the state does have custody of, and they're placed into those formal kinship placements. So just so you guys know, these placements have the option to become licensed or not. And so for those who choose to become licensed, not to become licensed, we want to make sure that those relatives are receiving pay parity in line with what foster parents receive for the duration of time a child is placed in their home. And we'll get into why I'm using those certain words here in a second. Let's see, we're looking at the number of kids placed. So as you can see here, at least 43% of kids in CPS care were placed with kin across the different regions in Texas. And we know that placing with kin has been a priority for the department. But when we're looking into these numbers, there's really only a small percentage of relatives who actually decide to get licensed. So for instance, the number for the end of last August of 2021, if you take a snapshot, it showed that a little over 8% became licensed. But I was just having a conversation the other day about the numbers throughout the fiscal year, and that number is more like 12%-ish. For again, the number of relatives that become licensed. So a very small percentage of kids that are placed with kin go through the licensure process. And anecdotally, we've heard a slew of reasons as to why this could be. Maybe it's something in their criminal history from a long time ago. Sometimes it can be family dynamics. Families may just be like, oh, I don't really know that I want to get licensed. That feels too long term, or feel like I'm kind of going against the parents, or even just someone not wanting to be under that much regulation. Not that they have something, that they're trying to hide. It's just a lot of folks coming in and out of your home. So, just before we kind of get into what we want to do, I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about the history, because the fact of the matter is that as a state, we've done better over time actually supporting relatives. And what we're trying to do this session is continue to move that needle. So I remember back in the day when relatives didn't receive any sort of compensation whenever a child was placed in their home. And eventually then it became a stipend. And then actually back in the 85th legislative session, TexProtects had really advocated for basically what's in statute right now, which basically says that a relative caregiver can get up to 50% of what a current licensed foster parent can receive for up to 12 months. There can be an extension under some circumstances, but basically a 12-month timeline. And so just also while we're looking at this slide here, just so you guys know, Brittany was able to talk about some of that exceptional item requests that the department had for prevention. In the same vein here, we are very excited to see that the department is also prioritizing, again, better supports for kin. We know that they have asked for an additional $6 million, which would actually provide up to $1,000 to kinship caregivers to meet basically those concrete needs. And they can also get reimbursement up to $750 if they choose to go down the licensure route. But when it comes to this statute, we really feel like we need to kind of open this back up and remove a lot of the barriers that currently exist. So to move that needle forward, we're calling this our pay parity priority, but it kind of has some different pieces. So again, you heard me talk about the 12-month timeline. There's a cap on that. And so we want to see that removed. You also heard me say that there's that 50% cap. We want to see that lifted as well. And then there's some language in the current statute that ties it to the current rate methodology. It has some basic rate, reimbursement rate terminology, and we really need to decouple that because for those of you who may be familiar, the state is currently looking to change the rate methodology, and I'm excited about that. And so we just want to make sure that the current statute isn't written in a way that when that moves forward, that it would be any sort of hindrance. So definitely decoupling that language as well. And then lastly, we've heard from a lot of you guys actually about one issue is like when families go through the home study process, if DFPS denies that, then they're not able to get this reimbursement. But let's say a court approves that placement. Obviously, this is an approved placement, but they aren't able to get the reimbursement. And so we just want to make sure that whether the department or whether a court approves the placement, if the child is in that home, we want to make sure that the relatives are receiving that compensation. And so, honestly, we've worked with a lot of partners. I've seen some names on here today that I know a lot of folks are pushing kinship priorities this session, which is really exciting. But I do just want to say really quickly here, because sometimes we get this question, we are not trying to disincentivize licensure. We do believe that if that is the right route for families and they're able to do that, we definitely are supportive of that route. We don't want to see barriers to that. But for those that choose or can't become licensed, we just want to make sure that they are adequately supported, because ultimately that support is passed on to the child. So now we're going to move a little bit away from kinship, talk about data. So this should look familiar to you guys if you joined us last year. We had a priority last session, and it's very similar this session. We really just want to make sure that we are getting real-time data and that is made available to the public to increase transparency, accountability, and effectiveness. So again, that critical child protection information, we need to make sure that it's updated and published monthly. The history there is that it used to just be updated and published annually. And when you're trying to look at trends or if there's things that need to be changed, you really need more frequent information than that. And so, and then also, as y'all heard us talk about and know all too well, this system's moving to a community-based approach. And so we just need to make sure that those providers in each community have the information they need to adjust accordingly. And legislators need to know what is and isn't working to be able to know where to invest the dollars. So I'm just going to show y'all a quick snapshot here. While we weren't able to pass a bill last session, we were very fortunate to be able to have a budget rider that was adopted that would require the monthly information to be published. And as you're seeing on your screen, and there's also a link there, this information has been being published and updated monthly, and it's been super helpful. And so if you're wondering, well, then why are y'all back at it if they're doing it again? Because it's a budget directive, that only stays in the budget for the 2 years. We're glad to see that it's currently in the proposed budget, but we want to make sure that it continues to stay in there. So that's why we are approaching it from a statutory angle as well. And then last but not least, workforce. We know a lot of folks are talking about workforce, but what we really want to talk about here. So again, when we're talking about workforce, we're talking about those frontline workers, investigators, alternative response workers, FBSS workers, conservatorship case workers. Our goal is to ensure that we have high quality workers all the way up the career ladder, not just on the ground, but also in positions of leadership. And we think that this needs to be tackled from several angles: recruitment, hiring, retention, and promotion. So let's start with recruitment, hiring, and retention. How do we get people interested in working for the state? And then once they get there, how do we get them to stay? So on this slide, you can see where we currently are with workforce turnover. This is probably not a shocker to a lot of you. There's been a lot of articles out there. We know that the turnover rate is high, 40%, for investigations, 21% for conservatorship. You guys have likely seen articles where there's been this mass exodus since the beginning of the year. So when people see this in the community, and this is what they're hearing, and then you're hearing also about like the pressure the system's under and the negative stories in the news, what's going to attract people to work here? What will attract the right people, the high quality people to work at the department? We know pay is a factor. So you see on your screen the little box where it talks about that $12,000 salary increase, which is something that TexProtects had championed a couple of sessions ago. We know that it's a factor, but we know it's only one piece of the puzzle. So we have to consider more than just pay. How do we promote a better culture and ensure workers are not overburdened? So one thing I had wanted to just kind of show you guys is, monthly salary. So again, we're talking about those promotions, those like, how do we get people to move up the career ladder, those high quality workers into positions of leadership? Again, pay is a piece of it, but what we actually found is like through the state auditor's office, they actually say the pay that they're receiving is in line with what others in the market make, but it's really about some of those incentives. So what we've been hearing a lot is, okay, so investigators, you lose your stipend if you move up the career ladder. For workers that move into a supervisory role, you're losing that travel check because you're more, based out of your desk. And then, also just in general, hearing that, is it really, worth the additional responsibility? And, we're not able to get overtime, but we know they're working the overtime. So things like that, benefits come into play, but what else needs to be addressed? So, we want to see high quality workers, not just any warm body filled positions all the way up the chain, because we're talking about a workforce that makes life altering decisions for families. So one thing, we were kind of looking at is maybe not trying to reinvent the wheel here, what's already in place. And so there currently is already something that the department produces. It's a human resource management plan, but currently it just looks at retention. So again, y'all heard me talk about how we need to be looking at recruitment, hiring, retention, and promotion. So we want them to kind of look at that and expand what that report looks like. And again, kind of thinking through how do we keep and promote a high quality workforce. So having the department go through the exercise to figure out what's needed will help set us up even to better know what exactly to advocate for next session. So now you've heard a lot from us. We're going to hear a lot from y'all, hopefully. So we're going to do some breakout discussions here. If you were around last time, we're doing something very similar. We're going to have 2 breakout rooms, one that is more prevention, upstream focused, one that's more system involvement, so downstream focused, and you can see some of the categories here on your screen. We will ask that you guys pick which room you feel like you can lend the most conversation to and knowledge, insight. So we're going to go ahead and do that, and then we're going to bring you guys back at 3:20 for some kind of concluding remarks. And so we look forward to the conversation.
If you don't see the option to join a breakout room, please let me know and I can assign you.
Is it in the?
Guillermo?
Oh, I see it now. Breakout rooms. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Give everybody a second to kind of get their bearings here. Do we have everybody back? I know we sometimes lose people during the breakout discussion, or sometimes they leave right after the breakout discussion. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, though. Well, I say I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Well, maybe don't look at your screen right now as I'm doing this. I thought I had it queued up. Sorry about that, y'all. Well, as I'm trying to find the slide that I'm looking for, there we go. I just want to thank you guys for participating in those breakout discussions. I particularly enjoy them because it's a little bit more intimate in having those discussions, and we really appreciate the feedback you all give us. As you can see, the feedback we got from y'all last time helped really shape our priorities for what they are going into session, and any information you guys provide us helps us in that further advocacy. So now we're going to kind of slip into, we've got about 10 minutes left, a little less, into how you can get connected with our work if you're not already connected to us, ways that we can continue to engage with you guys. And again, part of that is aimed at, so we can all continue to support each other in all of our work. So simplest way to do this, and I didn't say this earlier, so I apologize. You guys will get a copy of these slides and of the recording, and these slides have clickable links. Please don't feel like you feverishly have to be writing everything down or figuring out where on our website things are. But one of the easiest ways to stay connected with us is to sign up for our alerts and our emails. And an easy way to do that is just go to TexProtects.org. And if you scroll down, there's literally, this is a screenshot of what that box looks like. It's an orange box on our screen, and you can just fill out your information and let us know how to contact you. That email is so important. And then you'll get signed up for our emails, and our emails typically will tell you different events that we've got going on. So like this Texas tour, or anytime we've got lunch and learns, or anytime that we've got advocacy alerts during session, when bills and things are moving, we often will reach out to our audience and say, hey, we would love for you to engage on this particular topic. Here's how you guys can help. Or like I said, just, to know what we are up to. So this slide here, so like if you're looking for more specific ways to get involved, these are some of the ideas that we've kind of put together. Obviously, I do think signing up for our emails is a really helpful way to just kind of stay in touch with us and know what's going on. But obviously, we talked about a lot of different priorities today. We would love, for you guys to engage on those topics with your legislative offices. Anytime we're posting things on social media, if you guys can share that or like it or different things like that, and put those out to your networks, that would be great. And like I said, sometimes we have advocacy alerts, and we try to make that easy on you guys. So sometimes it's just very simply, hey, we really need folks to support this, particular strategy, and we will provide some proposed language, and sometimes all you got to do is fill things out. Like I said, we try to make it easy to come alongside us. Whoop, went too fast. And if you guys have worked with us for any amount of time, you know that we like to resource y'all well. So here's some of the resources. This is just some of the resources that we have. And so each of these you can click on. The State of the State actually has a lot of, I say a lot, it has some of the slides that we went through today, but more. And so, it really kind of paints a picture of what's happening with the child protection and well-being landscape. Of course, we've got our flow charts that still live on the website. So if you're ever going like, how the heck does this work? Or you have somebody reaching out to you wondering about the CPS process, these are things that you can potentially use and resource others as well. And then, of course, the child welfare funders. I actually had partnered with them for a CPS 101. They've got it up on their website as well. And so this is basically just, kind of gives you a breakdown of some of the terminology and what the goals are of the system and things like that. It can be very helpful if you're kind of just needing something to go, I need to understand what's happening at a higher level. And then down here, the other three that we have are some of our reports. We've got that home visiting advocacy toolkit. We've got more. So you heard Emily talk about our ACEs priority. We've got a really great updated report down here. And then the transforming the CPS system, we've got some recommendations there about how we can totally do the system a little bit differently. And so, like I said, these are just a few of the resources we have. We've got more on our website, but we felt like these might be some of the most helpful. And so this kind of wraps up our time. You know, again, we want to extend our gratitude to our sponsor, the Texas Child Welfare Funders. I don't know if Christine's still on, but they've been so kind to us and so helpful. And then obviously we are so thankful for Any Baby Can. Again, you heard me say earlier, they're such a great partner, and I don't say that lightly. They do amazing work, and we just work with them in so many different spaces, and they're outstanding. And thank you all who took an hour and a half out of you know, the bazillion things you could have done today, and you chose to spend it with us. So we really appreciate that, and all of y'all's feedback. And then last but not least, here's our the policy team, our contact information. We've got our cell phones up there. We've got our email addresses. So if anything sparked an interest for you guys today, like, hey, I want to learn more about this, please feel free to reach out if you got more questions, anything like that. We would love to chat more. So we are a couple of minutes early. I'm sure you guys wouldn't mind having 2 or 3 minutes back. But again, thank y'all so much. You'll receive a follow-up email with all of this information. Okay. Y'all have a good rest of the week and a happy holidays.